I want to go first to Brian on this. Brian, I think the question a lot of Americans who aren't following every jot and tittle of the Trump legal dramas want is the Justice Department operating normal? The justice system. Is the system of American justice operating normally here? Or as former President Trump says, is it operating abnormally simply because he's the defendant?
That's kind of a difficult question to answer. And the reason why I'd say is because, yes, it is operating abnormally, but not in the way that Donald Trump, I think, is putting forward. It is very abnormal that on the, I came to say the 11th hour, it's like 11th hour and 59 minutes, the Intermediate Appellate Court for New York reduces a bond for a defendant from $464 million to $175. It's abnormal for the Attorney General to give someone 30 days after they've had a judgment. That's more of a federal standard. In the state of New York, you can seek enforcement right afterwards. And so I think in many ways, Donald Trump is being handled with kid gloves in some ways, and he's being looked at much more harshly in other ways. And so it's abnormal for many reasons because he is the former president of the United States. The way that he operates from a financial standpoint as well as a political standpoint is abnormal. So an abnormal defendant would often have an abnormal prosecution. The only issue here is it following the law? Is it different because of who he is, or is it different because they're bending the law? As far as I've seen so far, I haven't seen the bending or breaking of laws to prosecute the former president.
Brian, thank you. That was an extremely helpful question for me anyway. I want to now turn to the politics. Now, let's go to John Santucci on this, who covers Trump and has covered Trump for a long time. The weaponization of the justice system. We should underline something. Yeah. Donald Trump said again and again that Joe Biden and his thugs are behind all this. There is zero evidence that Joe Biden has anything to do with these prosecutions, or frankly, that he has any thugs. But whatever. So this is the Trump political strategy. He gets a chance to step out of court and blame Biden for everything and make a little political speech.
Yeah, it's Terry. Terry, it's funny, as we were listening to Donald Trump, I was scribbling all the notes of things that he was saying that, frankly, were just not accurate. So just to go through a couple of them with our viewers, he talked about several names of prosecutors that are working on these cases, mentioned Pomerantz, Colangelo. These were prosecutors, Terry, as you well know, that were working on these cases well before Joe Biden entered the White House. So in the case of some of the DA's team originally, Pomerantz being one of them, Mark Pomerantz, a former federal prosecutor, was in private practice, was recruited by the previous Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, not Alvin Bragg, to look into this case, built a case that ultimately did not go forward. That other prosecutor he mentioned, Michael Colangelo, of course, was prior to working in the Department of Justice, worked in the New York State Attorney General's office when they had launched their investigation into President Trump years ago, even before he left the White House, Terry. So again, Donald Trump likes to say that this is all being orchestrated by Joe Biden, but as you just said, there is no evidence to support that. Some of these investigations have gone on well before Donald Trump even left the White House. So I do think, just for our viewers, we do need to zone in there. The other thing that we should talk about too for a second, Terry, is that Donald Trump said about that raid at Mar-a-Lago that it was illegal that they entered. Let's be clear. That visit by the federal officials to Mar-a-Lago that he has described as a raid happened after Donald Trump failed to comply with multiple requests and subpoenas for documents. And it was because of evidence and information that federal investigators have obtained that they said they believe there were more documents in Donald Trump's possession, that he was not being honest with federal investigators. And as you well know, Terry, the images show it. When they showed up at Mar-a-Lago, it is in that visit, if you will, the raid, as he describes it, that federal agents found documents stacked up in ballrooms and bathrooms throughout Mar-a-Lago. So Donald Trump saying that they showed up unexpected because they had complied, that is just simply not accurate, Terry.
Thank you, John. That is the issue right in the case. Let's go to Rick Klein on this. Rick, so one of the facts, hard facts of life perhaps for Donald Trump and American voters is that the case that he now faces an April 15th trial date for, the payment of hush money to Stormy Daniels, the misrepresenting his business expenses, and how that's been called a campaign contribution by the district attorney. That requires him to be in that courtroom every day that that case goes forward. So we're going to have the presidential candidate locked in court for as long as that trial lasts. Yeah, I almost feel sorry for American voters. This is a pretty serious election. There's some big things going on, and yeah, he's going to be in court. doing what he just did, making hay out of these prosecutions as best he can and making political speeches on the steps of the courthouse. It's a strange thing for an election to be.
Beyond strange, Terry, but I would note that during the primaries, there were multiple times where Donald Trump decided to show up in court, even though he didn't have to be there, and raised money off of the fact that he was supposedly being forced to be in court. And talking to several of the campaigns that flamed out in trying to dethrone Donald Trump from the Republican nomination to derail his quest, they believe that these legal cases helped him, almost without exception, that his polling numbers went up with additional legal heat, and that his appearances outside the courtroom were more effective than an organizing rally in Iowa or New Hampshire might have been. So he has done what he can out of this, and as you said, weaponized the prosecutions against him. I've no doubt he'll continue to do that. Now, it may be different in the general election. It's one thing to have primary voters attracted to his side because they feel like they're being attacked because he's being attacked under the judicial process, but it is more than a bit disingenuous for him to complain about having to be in court when he has made as much political hay, as you mentioned, but from that fact that he is in court and outside of court, and he will have access to plenty of microphones going into and outside of court, and he has plenty of opportunities to campaign as he wishes. I would note that he didn't have a campaign event over the weekend. It's been actually a few weeks since he did a major rally, more than a week since he was back in Ohio. Joe Biden has been campaigning a lot more than Donald Trump. It's a bit of a role reversal, and you're right, with the court calendar getting very clogged, potentially in the spring and summer, it may be the case more often that he is forced into essentially making his legal strategy against political strategy one and the same.
And that is what he's doing, Rick. Let's go to Aaron Katersky. So, Aaron, this situation that Donald Trump is in, outside the courtroom, he comes, he makes this political speech, he blames Biden, all kinds of things, throws around allegations. Inside court, he's a defendant now, a defendant in a criminal case, facing criminal penalties. He's just gotten through with this, the appeals on the bond that he owes in the civil fraud case. Is he different in court? Is he chastened at all? Look, any human being looking at prosecutors who want to, convict him of a crime, that's a tough spot to be in. Do you see any chink in his armor in there?
You don't see much of it, Terry, although he is made to rise when the judge enters, as opposed to everyone in the room normally rising for him as a president or former president. And so some of the optics may be different. But when the photographers come in at the beginning of the hearing to take a few pictures, he glares right at them. He understands the power of the image of him in court and what it means and the kind of defiance that he wants to present. Occasionally, if he sees someone he thinks is favorable, he'll give them a wink or a thumbs up or even mouth thank you to a group of spectators in the courtroom. No idea who they were necessarily, but he's always looking around the room to see who's watching and to see how perhaps his behavior will be interpreted. It's one of the quirks of New York law. There are no cameras, video cameras in the courtroom for the proceedings, and you wonder if Donald Trump would prefer that there were, so that his image could come off maybe the way he wants. But today, it was left to his lawyer to make the argument, Todd Blanche, that this case should be either delayed or dismissed, and the judge was having none of it. And it almost seemed he was ready to punish the defense lawyer for even raising such a proposition without proper legal standing. So whatever Trump says outside of court, inside of court, his arguments are falling short. And one more thing, Terry, if I may, it was Trump who almost derailed his own case in the civil fraud judgment. An appeals court just allowed him to post a smaller bond of $175 million. But for a couple of days on social media, Trump's been saying he's sitting on $500 million cash. The appellate court could well have said, well, got to use that for your bond. They didn't, of course, but it shows you the risks of speaking out of turn outside the bounds of the courtroom.
That's a great point, Aaron. He is a difficult client if you're his lawyer, and a difficult defendant in these cases for judges to make sure the justice system works as best as it can under these circumstances. I want to go to Chris Timmons on the question of, look, what the next step, or one of the next steps in this April 15th trial coming up, is they're going to select a jury. Now, that seems to me, we're a pretty divided country. In New York, you can find plenty of division, too, even though it's primarily a Democratic area. How are you going to find a jury that can give this man and give the rest of us, give the system a fair trial?
So, Terry, I mean, it's kind of like when you're hanging out with your relatives, and unfortunately the topic of conversation goes towards politics. What you're trying to do is identify the people who have what we think of as cognitive bias. They either can accept information or can't accept information, or only accept certain types of information. So if you think about it, we all know people who are enamored with President Trump. And so those people who are enamored with the former president can only accept information that's good for them, and they'll explain away any information that they find out that's bad for them. That's a juror that the state wants to identify and strike, either by cause, which they've got unlimited cause strikes, or through what we refer to as peremptory strikes that they strategically can use. Flip side of that, the defense is looking for people. There are people that we all know who can't accept any good information about President Trump, and that anything that comes into their thinking that is bad for President Trump, that's going to be ironclad with them. That's evidence that they're going to accept. And so what you're trying to do during jury selection, and that's a law school class that I teach at Georgia State University here in Atlanta, you're just trying to find the jurors that can be fair. And that's a tall order when you're talking about a case like this, where just about everyone has an opinion, not just about the former president, but also about the case itself, the hush money case that we're talking about here in New York, Terry.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.